In the early 90s, Swedish pop group Ace of Base emerged on the music scene and seemingly overnight stormed charts around the world, selling millions of records and being widely hailed as the new ABBA. But with the exception of a few minor hits years later, Ace of Base seemed to fade from view relatively quickly. So whatever did become of that Swedish foursome who were forever bleating on about some sign or another? How did a Swedish pop band come to have a reggae light sound in the first place? And how did they achieve such phenomenal success in the early 90s, and why were they not able to sustain it? So many questions, let's find out. Ace of Base were made up of three siblings, Jenni, Jonas and Lynn Malin Begren, and another guy called Ulf Ekberg. They grew up in Gothenburg, Sweden, an industrial city west of Stockholm. Ulf and Jonas were school friends and they played in different bands during their adolescence. Jonas eventually brought his two sisters on board to provide vocals for his group, who originally had a techno and house sound. In August 1990, when their bass player ditched one of their gigs for a Rolling Stones concert, Ulf Ekberg replaced him and soon became a permanent member. The new lineup subsequently changed their name to Ace of Base, and the world-conquering band were born. I mistakenly thought Jonas and Ulf just hung around in the background of videos and did really dodgy dance moves, but in actual fact wrote a lot of the group's hits and were instrumental in getting the band off the ground. After dabbling with different sounds, they finally discovered their musical direction when the two guys heard the song Another Mother by KO in a record shop in 1990. KO was a Swedish singer and the track had been produced by Dennis Pop, the man who would go on to discover super producer Max Martin. So Jonas and Ulf sent Dennis Pop a demo of a song entitled Mr. Ace. And as it turns out, Dennis Pop's first impression of the track was not too favourable. But fortunately for the band, Dennis's car stereo broke and the tape got stuck in it, and he was forced to listen to it every day for 2 weeks on his way to work. And eventually the song wore him down and it started to grow on him. So Dennis agreed to record with the band, and in July 1992 the demo track Mr. Ace was re-recorded and renamed All That She Wants. Wheel of Fortune, their first single, was a hit in Denmark. After that success, they signed with Universal Polygram for Europe. All That She Wants was released in the summer of 1992 and soon went to number 1 in Germany. And in May 93, it became a UK number 1 for 3 weeks. Despite the huge success in Europe, American record labels were reluctant to sign the group. Grunge and pop R&B dominated the US charts in the early 90s. And it was hard to imagine where a Europop act like Ace of Base would fit in. Even the band's European label Polygram declined the opportunity to sign them in America. In his autobiography Soundtrack to My Life, record company boss Clive Davis says that he heard All That She Wants on the radio whilst on holiday on his yacht in Europe, and he immediately had the boat dock so he could contact the band's management and sign them. So Ace of Base were signed to Arista for the Americas, and in October 93, All That She Wants was a number 2 on the American Billboard Hot 100. Their follow-up single, The Sign, was released in late 1993 and it became a US number 1 for 7 weeks. It ended 1994 as the best-selling song of the year in America. The album, the US edition of which was called The Sign, sold 21 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling albums of the decade and one of the biggest-selling debut albums of all time. Their album of the same name became a US number 1, a feat that even ABBA hadn't been able to manage, and the second biggest-selling album of the year, only beaten by Elton John's soundtrack for The Lion King. Apparently the album earned Arista Records in excess of $42 million. But despite their meteoric rise to global success, the band would soon have to grapple with the dark side of fame. Jenni from the band had been staying at her parents' home during a rare break in early 1994 when she was awoken in the middle of the night by a woman holding a knife. The attacker, who turned out to be a crazed fan, grabbed Jenni by the hair, held the knife to her throat and forced her to walk to her parents' bedroom. At that point, Berggren's mother lunged at the attacker and somehow managed to disarm her, but in the process received stab wounds in both hands. Speaking in 2016 to the Western Australian newspaper, Jenni had this to say about the deeply traumatic incident. "I was attacked the week before we made it to #1 in the US, so it really wasn't anything in particular for me," she recalls. The ordeal had a lasting impact on the group, especially Jenni's sister Malin, who subsequently struggled with depression and was uncomfortable being in the public eye. Speaking about his sister in 2020, Jonas had this to say. "Malin never wanted to be a pop star. Show business didn't fit her at all. On top of that, she was afraid of flying and she has a lot of integrity. Journalists asking you questions, most of them very shallow. She really did not like it. She was quite depressed over that time and she actually wanted to leave the band in 1993, before we broke America, but we kept her in the band and we convinced her to stay. From the second album, you can see that we were starting to phase Malin out from the band." Reports also began to emerge early in the band's career that Ulf had belonged to a neo-Nazi band during his adolescence. The punk band went by the name Commit Suicide and had a number of songs with disturbing lyrics. Ulf was also a member of the Swedish Democrats, a nationalist and far-right political party. In a 1997 documentary, he spoke about his past before Ace of Base. "I told everyone I really regret what I did. I've closed that book. I don't want to even talk about it. That time does not exist in me anymore. I closed it and I threw the book away in 1987. I took the experience from it and I learned from it. But that life is not me, it's someone else." Despite the challenges, Ace of Base carried on, releasing their highly anticipated second album, The Bridge, in 1995. The lead single, Beautiful Life, was notable for being one of super producer Max Martin's first hits. But The Bridge only sold a small fraction of their debut, and subsequent albums produced diminishing returns. Their third album, Flowers, also failed to live up to expectations, despite one of the singles, Cruel Summer, going gold in the US, and the lead single, Life is a Flower, becoming the most played song on European radio in 1998. Their third album, renamed Cruel Summer for the US edition, only reached number 101 there. They released a Greatest Hits in '99, which fulfilled their 4-album contract with Arista, after which they faded from view stateside. Their last album, Da Capo, in 2002, was only released in a few countries and for the most part flew under the radar. Jenni and Ulf did most of the promo for the record, and Lynn, who'd become increasingly tired of the pop star lifestyle, only attended one performance in Germany. She effectively left the band around this time, with her departure only confirmed years later. Clive Davis had his own theory on why the group didn't enjoy continued success. In his book, The Soundtrack of My Life, he writes, "They just couldn't pull it off a second time. You can't schedule a charisma implant. Well, why don't you tell us what you really think?" In summer 2009, Jenni, Jonas and Ulf toured again as a trio and had an Ace of Base world tour, but Jenni departed the band soon after. With no vocalists left at this stage, Jonas and Ulf recruited 2 Swedish singers, Clara Hagman and Julia Williamson, both from Swedish Pop Idol. The new incarnation of Ace of Base quietly released a new album entitled Golden Ratio in 2010, but Julia and Clara left the group a few short years later. Jenni released her solo album My Story and an autobiography To Win the World in 2010, and she continues to tour, performing at 90s themed concerts as Jenni from Ace of Base. Jonas has confirmed in interviews that Lynn is now leading a peaceful life and has no desire to return to music or fame. Ulf and Jonas continue to make music, but Jenni recently shot down any plans for a reunion. "We won't reform, we're finished working together, but we're not finished being family together. We have a lot of fun plans in the future, but no musical plans." Despite their success being limited to a few years in the 90s, the band's influence has extended far beyond. Indie icon Beck has cited them as an influence. Katy Perry and Lady Gaga also referenced Ace of Base as musical inspiration, and you can definitely hear Ace of Base in Gaga's song Alejandro. which sounds freakishly like Don't Turn Around. Ace of Base may not have been able to sustain their phenomenal success, but their infectious melodies and reggae sound for a short time in the 90s truly conquered the world. If you have any thoughts on anything in the video, please leave them in the comments below. If you got value from the video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out my other videos.